Okay.
FIT Talks is the oral history program of the Fashion Institute of Technology, directed by Karen Trivett, Head of Special Collections and Archives. Today, June 20th, we are taping in the library of the university at 7th Avenue and 27th Street in Manhattan with Stan Herman. My name is Phyllis Dillon. Designer Stan Herman, one of the most revered names in the apparel business, has a long career that parallels the development of the American fashion business. He worked for leading American couturiers and firms in the 1950s and recognized the 1960s revolution towards more fashion informality that reflected major cultural shifts. As president of the CFDA from 1991 to 2006, he organized fundraising for AIDS and cancer, helped organize the industry to show under the tents at Bryant Park, and became the foremost designer of uniforms while also designing for QVC. He has probably dressed more people than anyone else in America and loves seeing people enjoy wearing his clothing and uniforms. He has a unique overview of the fashion industry. Parsing his career decade by decade helps us learn more about the significant milestones of American fashion. Among his awards are 3 Coty Awards, the Geoffrey Beene Lifetime Achievement Award from the CFDA, and an honorary doctorate from the University of Cincinnati. So welcome, Stan.
Oh my God. All those things. How wonderful. My father would be proud.
Yes.
Okay.
He is, I'm
yes,
sure.
He is. He was. Yeah.
After graduating with a design degree from the University of Cincinnati in 1950 and participating in the Korean War, you worked for a number of fashion firms, Mr. John, Pauline Trigère, Fira Benenson. What did you do and learn at those firms?
Well, first I'll sort of set up a scenario for you. 7th Avenue was like a very tiny campus. Extremely small. I mean, the Garment Center district is still the same. It's no different than it was is today, but it was tiny. Everybody was in about, the most important people were in 3 or 4 buildings along 7th Avenue. Every corner had a good egg cream. Every corner had a rolling rack. It was a time when, of course, when I first walked up 7th Avenue, I got out of the subway at 34th Street, walked up 7th Avenue to 498 7th Avenue, which was the first building I sort of worked in. And you got to know everybody. It's a very famous story about the Avenue because the tailors that lived and worked on the Avenue at that time all came down for lunch at 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, and they would all talk to each other about what was going on in the business. So-and-so has gone out of business, so-and-so's wife is having an affair with so-and-so. It was a wonderful time. It was also a time that was slower. If you were talented, you could get a job. If you were, and I think I was talented. I went to school in Cincinnati. I wasn't prepared really to compete with a lot of the people who were going to schools in New York. Although I had been born in New York originally. But what I had was the ability to talk, to speak, to get people to talk to me. And I was sort of cute, you know, it's a part of the world. When you're cute, everybody loves you when you're cute. They don't like you when you're not cute. And my first job, actually it wasn't for Mr. John, it was for his partner named Fred. It was called John-Fredericks at the time. You get to meet one person, and then they introduce you to the second person. He introduced me to Pauline Trigère because she was a part of that. He introduced me to people like, this is going to sound crazy, like Sophie Gimbel, people like Hattie Carnegie, people like the great milliners, all the great milliners. You know, and every designer that came to America in the beginning, almost every single one was a milliner before they became a designer. The most famous, of course, being Halston, but that was a little later on. But my first job actually was sitting in the showroom at John-Fredericks and designing nothing but the black dresses that went on to all his customers when they came to be fitted for hats. He didn't want anybody to see anything but the head from here up. So we did a little black dress with a crew neck that you could open up, And when the customers came in, they'd sit in front of a mirror, he'd slip a black dress over them, and they would be shadowed by the mirror in front of them and the hats around them. And I have to tell you, I was lucky enough to have done that with Gloria Swanson, Greta Garbo, I mean, all these extraordinary people, and their heads were all big. That's all I can tell you. Everyone had a large head. But I hated designing hats. I thought it was very fey, and I wasn't very fey, and I just hated it. So Fred got me a job with Fira Benenson. From Fira Benenson, and I took Norman Orell's partner's job at Fira Benenson. I carried packages up Broadway to Park Avenue. I refused to go through the back entrance. I would go through the front entrance. We would make all these wonderful, stiff, horrifying dresses for all these very intellectual ladies on the Upper East Side. We didn't have the glamour ladies. We had the intellectual ones, the ones who were married to senators and professors, and they all loved brocade, and every dress could sit up and stand and talk to you. And I guess it was good training, because from there I got another job on 7th Avenue as an assistant, and started the trek toward getting my own design room, which took me almost 8 years. It was at that time when you had to apprentice. There were very few designers that came in and became international stars or even national stars. The only one I can think of was a very good friend of mine at the time, and we both came to New York at the same time, was Arnold Scassi. Oh. Arnold at 22 is deified. He became the star at 22, which was really quite interesting. And I'm responsible for his changing his name from Isaacs to Scassi.
Okay.
And the reason his name was changed is because General Motors would not use a Jewish name on their ads. They said they wouldn't even use Nettie Rosenstein. They wouldn't use anybody that had that connotation. Interesting, because 7th Avenue was so Jewish. I mean, most of the owners were Jewish or Italian, but they would not use his name.
When he worked in Paris, he used the name Isaacs?
No. Well, Arnold really didn't. He was from Montreal. Did he ever work in Paris?
I think he did.
Well, the name Isaacs was changed in 1954. That I can tell you. My Aunt Florence changed his name. Okay. And she said, you should change your name. Herman is so uninteresting. But when I spelled it backwards, it became Yell That's Namre, and I thought that was awful. So I didn't do that. But again, times were slower. The campus was smaller. Everybody seemed to know everybody. Once you got a job on the west side of 7th Avenue, you were considered good. If you got a job on the east side of 7th Avenue, that was not so good.
Was that related to the price level of the clothing?
Absolutely related to the price level of clothing, and probably to the price of your atelier or of your studio. $498, $500, $512, $530, $550. Those were the buildings on the west side. All the other numbers, the odd numbers, were on the east side, and nobody seemed to want to go to the east side. And if you moved over to Broadway, you were off Broadway. So
I've read that, I don't know who this was, but someone said that the fashion business could be divided into thirds. There were the people who did the inexpensive clothing, right. The designers who did original sportswear, but that clothing was expensive.
Yes.
And then the coats and suits people. Is that a sort of general?
If I were to write a book about it, I mean, when I came into the business, it was called the dress business. It wasn't called the coat and suit business. It wasn't called sportswear business. It was called the dress business. Everything was a dress business. And all those buildings along that side of the avenue, except for 512 and parts of 500, were all dress people. Sportswear wasn't quite, we didn't even use the name sportswear in the 50s. It started later on.
I guess I was thinking about Claire McCardle, the people who were...
Right. Well, Claire was a blip that became
very
a flower.
Small.
But it became a flower. She became, I mean, what she did was so special, but people didn't recognize it right away. Only the cognoscenti knew about Claire McCardle. I mean, she and Rudy Gernrich were, who nobody knows about anymore, were the people who, they were the poets over here, But my interpretation of what happened to sportswear, I think sportswear really started with Anne Klein. Annie was a good friend of mine, and when we get to that, I can tell you the story about how she did it. I mean, how she started. I was there when it all happened. Not that she was the only one, but again, going back, it was the dress business. Even when you went to school, you learned how to make dresses. Once in a while, you would make a coat. Once in a while, but it was the dress. But women weren't wearing pants. They were wearing slacks, or they were wearing men's slacks. So it was the dress. And all the big companies in 550 and 530, which were the great buildings, didn't have name designers. They had the names of, like, Herbert Sondheim, who's Steve Sondheim's father, and I actually worked for Herbert Sondheim, Brunel, Train and Orel. I mean, these were all the big businesses without name designers, with the name of the company owned by the gentleman or the wife who designed the clothes.
And in the department store, those clothes only had the labels of the department store, right?
Yes. The designer name in America, of course, it was always, when I went to school, it was Jacques Fat, Christian Dior, Balenciaga. Those were the only designers. When I first came to New York, I suddenly realized there were people like Norman Norell and Sophie Gimbel, who really wasn't a designer, Heidi Cartier, who wasn't a designer but was a stylist. There were names like Carolyn Schnur. I mean, there were so many names, but nobody had any international flair whatsoever. Even Norman didn't have any international flair. We sold our soul, our hearts, our heartbeat to France. Not even Italy at that time. Nobody could be a designer. You had to copy a Balenciaga to be famous. There are companies that set up for that. Stores like Orbach set up just to copy. That was the pinnacle. The big companies, the ones that made in America clothing that were like $24.99 and $28.99 and $39.99. All those clothes were made here. They were all made in America, and they were shipped to America, not to Europe, not to anywhere. We weren't global. We were strictly a pedestrian little area.
Yeah, or you could see it in a positive way, because it's about ready to wear.
Right.
And it's about democracy and mass production, which we really, we may not have invented it in the 19th century, but we really developed it.
No, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. I know when I first became a real designer, which was for a company like called Martini Design, which was owned by a man named Sylvan Rich and Jerry Silverman, we made all the clothes. We designed the clothes. We made the clothes in the back, and this was all on 537th Avenue. We had the whole floor. When Bloomingdale's came up and they made an order, we made all the clothes in the back and shipped them right from the side up to Bloomingdale. I mean, when does that happen anymore? Except for the young kids today who are beginning to do that. What's fascinating to me, Phyllis, is that the campus is still the same size. What's happening in the campus is completely different. All the ancillary people are being squeezed out. The designer manufacturers are being squeezed out. The showrooms are being squeezed in, and all around them is the changing world of 7th Avenue, of the Garment District. I mean, I'm on the Garment District bid board, as you know. I'm the only designer on it. Everybody else is either a banker or owns the buildings. And that's what's happening to the Garment Center. It's being squeezed into big business.
Yes. Well,
I know I'm running all over the place.
No, that's okay. But you got interested in these issues early on, right?
I'm a political designer. I think I'm the only one who is political. I think maybe I had the time to think that way. I mean, that's how I ran the CFDA, very politically. But it's our home here. This is our home. Here we are at FIT, which is on the edges of the Garment Center. Yeah. Wouldn't it be terrible if the Garment Center disappeared?
Right.
It's disappearing as we knew it, but it doesn't have to disappear completely.
Yeah. I think people don't realize, and maybe you could speak about this, how different the fashion world was when Eleanor Lambert and the main and her business promoting the main designers, what the CFDA was like before.
Well, the CFDA was born in 1962. Eleanor Lambert was born long before that, but she was the smartest of all the PR people in America. She looked at this industry and she knew that there was a lot of money to be made for it. And she also knew something that very few people admit to, that most designers are insecure. She took advantage of the insecurity of their lives when she took over their PR. And in doing so, she both raised the level of what was going on this campus that I keep talking about, and at the same time deified some and left the others in the back. It's not that we're so different today, but it was such a small business then. I personally was kept out of the CFDA for 4 years by Bill Blass because he didn't think I was designing clothes that were expensive enough at Mr. Mort. And I remember I tried to form a new organization that would oppose the CFDA. And I had meetings out in the Hamptons with a lot of young designers, a lot of famous young designers. We were all so excited. We don't have to be in the CFDA. We don't have to be in the CFDA. We can do our own thing. We can do young designers. This is long before the young designer thing took off. And little by little, the CFDA plucked everyone away from us. Once they got into the CFDA, they weren't interested in us. So I definitely made it. I never. Another thing about me is just probably why I'm not Ralph Lauren. I never had a PR person. I never had anybody pushing me in that way. I think it was wrong. I think in a strange way it was my own silly ego who thought I could do it myself. But with a PR agent, it's amazing how things happen if you have a good PR agent, and Eleanor was the best. I didn't want her as my PR agent. Until the day she died, we had a loving, hands-off relationship. Yeah. I still am today the head of a group that has dinner twice a year in Eleanor's honor. So I honor her, but at the same time, I wish she had honored me a little more.
Yes. I mean, we are...
She was quite a lady.
We are grateful to her for raising fashion to the level of architects and designers. She also, I've read, convinced the NEA to start funding fashion collections.
Absolutely.
She thought that the people who made clothes were artists.
That was what that is the what's the word when you have an organization? You have a mission statement. Yes. That's the mission statement of the CFDA. It comes down from where Eleanor was. We had a big fashion show on Broadway, which she announced to the world that the American designer had to be taken seriously. And of course, she was in heaven and luck when they all went to Versailles. You know that great show in Versailles. Yes. And Stephen Burrows just blew the world away.
1973.
Is that it?
I checked the date today.
Good. You're better than Geoffrey Banks.
I knew it might come up.
No. I mean, it was an extraordinary moment in our and Eleanor, I give her credit for it. She did it. But what she did do is what you referenced before, was she controlled the press. And if you weren't an active member of her organization, you didn't get the press that her people got. She used me because she knew that I was smart and I was quoted a lot. She liked my clothes, but she didn't think they were expensive enough. I remember Geoffrey Beene saying to me once, I didn't want to meet you. You do such cheap clothes. I said, come on, Geoffrey. He said, well, I've just looked at them, and they're really nice. We used to share the same fit model, so it was a constant fight between us.
But American Readywear really had good quality.
I put some of the Mr. Mort clothes that I made for $39 up against anybody's clothes. Anne Klein said to me many years before she died, when I became a hot designer on 7th Avenue, she said, save at least 10 pieces from every collection. It's extremely important. This should be a legacy to you. And I said, I'm a terrible saver. And she said, well, I'm saving everything. And I never took her advice. But after she died, in my hometown of Passaic, New Jersey, where I grew up, I was born in New York, all her clothes burned up in a fire. She wasn't around to know that, but all of her legacy went up in a fire. So at that time I said, you see, Herman, you were right, but now I'm so upset that I thought my model would keep them, but she sold them for tax loss.
Too bad.
And I fitted on her for 12 years. So once in a while somebody sends me a Mr. Mort thing, It was one of those hidden secret labels. It was good clothes. I liked my clothes.
Oh,
they were good clothes.
I think I told
Yeah.
you that when I was, 18 years old, I aspired to those things.
That's right. They were aspirational clothes at a good price. That was my whole thing. I used to put a thing over my over the desk. Every dress has to look twice its price. Every dress has to look. And during the fittings, that's what I would say to my assistants. If it doesn't look twice the price we're going to sell it for, we're not going to show it. And that was, and we were talking about that just today. I just came from fittings in New Jersey for my QVC line, and I'm suddenly a print maven, which I never was in my life, because at Mr. Mort, they frightened me. Prints frightened me, and I liked solid colors, and they always looked more expensive to me. And so I ended up being a solid color designer. You never know how those things happen. So now when I see a print, I know what I like, but I'm not sure that everybody else is going to like it, because my feelings are so special about those things. I'm not.
So,
go ahead. Ask me.
You're talking about the loungewear that you sell on QVC.
Yeah, that I sell now. Yes. And
so the samples are made in New Jersey?
No, we don't even make samples in New Jersey. We do all the designing in New Jersey. Everything's made in China.
Okay.
Let's not go there. Everything's made in China. I mean, we can go there. I've had so many factories. I've been around 6 decades now. And I mean, 1953, that's when it started. What is it now? 2007. How long is that?
2017.
Is that 60 years? What? Well, it's true. I mean, I'm the only one left. The only designer of my time, but he's not designing, is, I don't know if you remember Casper.
Yes.
Herbert Casper, he's still alive. But everybody else, I mean, Oscar's gone, Bill's, well, he was older, but Bill is gone. Donald Brooks is gone, Geoffrey Beene is gone, Chester Weinberg is gone, Gus Tussell is gone. I mean, it was a different time, and that goes way back. We were talking about designers of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But all those decades, they slip by very quickly. And isn't it wonderful that I'm still doing clothes for QVC?
Yes. Well,
and my uniforms.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get to that later.
Talk about QVC, because, I every once in a while put it on, and there's an excitement about it, where
it's
seeing
true.
the designer, seeing the product,
right,
and then getting the feedback immediately.
Well, you do get the feedback immediately. I'm on now 24 years. This is my 24th year, and QVC is 30 years old. So I went on when it was 6 years old. I was no longer a big name on 7th Avenue. I was not even the president of the CFDA at the time, which also changed my life completely. But they came to me, and somebody came to me and said, you're doing loungewear, and I was doing loungewear. Why don't you speak? I never heard of QVC. And when I told my friends I was going to go to do QVC, they laughed. I remember Donald Brooks, what he said to me, "Are you crazy? What are you, nuts?" I said, "But what do I have to lose? I love the idea of being in front of a camera." He didn't. Other people didn't. And it was an immediate love affair for myself. And obviously what I was doing sold. I mean, I can't tell you what the numbers are. They're frightening. They're absolutely frightening. I just got my orders today for next spring. I mean, Saks should give you that kind of business. For instance, QVC now, when I went on QVC originally, if you went on and you sold $1,000 a minute, that was considered pretty good. $1,000, not 1,000 units, but $1,000 a minute. Today, if you go on in prime time, because it's all set up as daytime, prime time, evening time, overnight time, if you go on in prime time, the average per minute that you should sell is between $10,000 and $12,000 a minute. That's a lot of clothes to sell. And if you don't sell that, because everything is down to a science. Everything is down to a second. Everybody sits in the back in the green room, and they watch the numbers. And they have now QVC has a $9 billion business. HSN has a $3 billion business. There are other channels all over the place. It's a marketing tool that I hope the younger people catch on to, because it hit the millennials, it hit all those people who were beginning to stay home, didn't want their bodies exposed when they went to stores, wanted to choose. They found out it was not only very easy to choose, but they could send it back the next day. People really didn't think it was going to be what it is today. They're now sort of old-fashioned with the way people are buying clothes. We're living through. I was just with a number of designers over the weekend because I was a officiant at a wedding, and a lot of these designers were there. We were talking about these are famous designers. We were talking about the business. They don't know what to do now. They don't know what the answers are. It's not in the stores. It's in the internet. QVC was an answer to some of them, but you have to really have a product that the average person wants. You can't talk over their heads. You have to be very careful and skillful that you do it well and in taste, and that it's priced very well, which is another thing that's happened in this world. Do you know how inexpensive clothes are today? Yes. People talk about how expensive clothes are. They are so inexpensive. I never did anything that was $29 or, I mean, my clothes, and they were cheap clothes, were $39, $49. You can buy things for $14 today. They may not be the best things in the world, but you can go to Zara, you can go to H&M, you can go, and I can tell you what I pay people in China to sew my stuff. I have to close my eyes. I don't know who's sewing them at that price, but the stores demand that price. And if you don't meet them at that price, they go to the next person. And that's not just happening to inexpensive, it's happening to the better people too. Mm. They're saying, I can only sell you up to a certain price point. Over that price point, I can't sell you anymore. And that takes their creativity and stamps on it.
Yes. It appears that people are spending less money for clothes also.
They don't have to spend as much money. They don't have to spend as much money. I mean, this is a schmata from Brooks Brothers. It's not expensive. It's not the greatest jacket, but, oh, I'm sorry. This is a schmata from Brooks. It's not the great, but it services me well. When I go out, I'll put on maybe something that I feel a little different in. The two gentlemen that I married this weekend wore Tom Ford. From far, it could have been any tuxedo, but when you got close to it, you knew it was pretty damn good. But clothing is, I defy anybody to see my clothes on QVC and see how beautifully they're sold. Beautifully. I don't have to do interlinings. I don't have to do all the things that you do for ready to wear. But the clothes are beautifully sewn. In that campus I talked about,
yes,
where the manufacturing was, what this country did is they never upgraded. They never said, I've got to compete internationally. So the same machines buzz away there that have been buzzing away for 40 years. You go over to China, you go into these factories in Vietnam, they're incredible. They're clean, I mean, I'm sure there are lousy factories, but they've got the machinery. I became famous on QVC because one fabric was called chenille. I discovered chenille. I don't know how I discovered chenille, but it all came from one part of America, Dalton, Georgia, Alabama, right in the northeast west corner of of Georgia and west corner of Alabama. All the bedspreads were made down there, and I started to make robes out of it. The chenille robes became the most popular robes. I sold thousands and thousands and thousands on QVC. The demand from QVC was so great that I could not make it alone. And the factory had 600 people working there. So we sent all the equipment over to Pakistan. Because not only that, we couldn't, QVC kept demanding more and more, less and less price.
It's a raised rib fabric, right?
It's done on it.
It's got a pile.
It's a pile. It's stitched into into a backing. The backing can be satin, cotton, but it's stitched into it.
Yes.
And there are women who still, I can't do it anymore, but everything was sent to Pakistan, and they wrote back saying, this is the worst equipment we've ever seen. How long have you had this equipment? We have better equipment than that. They never even used it. It's frightening. It's absolutely frightening. Now I don't make, thank God Alabama was very good, is a very good state. They took all these people who lost their jobs and they retrained them, which made me feel terrific because 600 people out of work. I mean, it was terrible. We used to make great fabric here.
Yes, that's the other part of the story.
Oh.
It's gone.
gone because, again, I'll go to my uniform business. I've been in the uniform business since 1974, 75. And it was a time when when they were making polyester knits in America. They were making on these subpar machinery, selling it like crazy, Everybody was wearing a polyester suit. And suddenly, I started to sample stuff from Japan and Korea that was made out of polyester that was like silk.
Beautiful.
And I went to the large companies here, Klopman, Burlington, because I had a big pencil. I was dressing United Airlines and TWA Airlines and people like that. I said, God, you guys, you know, this, well, we're selling tons of it. I said, it's not going to last. I'm going to have to buy fabric overseas, which is a no-no in the uniform business. It's American flag waving all over the place.
I see.
And when I did that, it was not a good thing, but there was nothing I could do to find fabric that I thought was right to move forward. That's what America did.
It's the irony is that DuPont, we
Right.
were the inventors
Right.
of these synthetics. And then they just stuck to the middle range
Absolutely.
and the lower range.
You said it better than me, actually.
And then,
that's
but
right.
I've read also that after World War II, the Japanese, we helped rebuild their textile industry, and they went.
Well, it was like the cars. I mean, when the Japanese cars first, because I'm a car buff, I know more about cars than I do about patterns now. But when the Japanese cars first came in, they laughed. How can they possibly? And you saw, even in the bad bones that they were sending over, that there was going to be something amazing there. And as Japan grew, Europe stayed this way, and we went down. Now it's a little different, but for some reason, we didn't invest in our own selves, and it lost out. And I hate to say, I keep going back to the campus, which has its tentacles. You know they're doing the Brooklyn thing now.
Yes.
They'll be sewing
Sunset
in Brooklyn,
Park, yes.
the Sunset Park, and everything was down to the down to Chelsea, down to the meatpacking district. But within that, you're beginning to see people sewing again. Some of the stuff is really quite good, really good.
Yeah, that's what I hear. From some younger people
Yes.
don't want a big,
But they
big
can't.
corporation.
And
You know,
they
they
can't
want,
have it. Either you're big or you're small.
Okay.
Either you're big or small. If I sell Sam's Club 200,000 units, what am I going to sell a little boutique? 4 units, 5 units? I can't service both of them. Either you go that route, unless you're Calvin Klein or Ralph Lauren. But even, not talking out of terms, even those big companies like Calvin and well, even Donna and Ralph, who were the backbone of the industry from the 80s on, are beginning to find the level not quite what it was before. The playing field is changing. They're all trying to build and rebuild. I don't know who's going to be the winner, who's going to be the loser. At this moment, Ralph is the most interesting because he was so consistently moving upward, and now it's not quite the same. Not quite. And Donna's not, she's gone. So that whole Donna Calvin, Ralph era is over with. Who the next leaders are going to be, I don't know. Do you?
No.
I don't know. I mean, we've had people like Michael Kors, we've had Tory Burches, they're there. Somebody's going to move out ahead of the pack. Somebody's going to find a way to make designers in America. I'm not talking about the corporations like the J. Crews and the big box stores, but somebody's going to break through and maybe that is even changed. Maybe we don't need those kind of people anymore. Designers will be different. I would hate to start over now. Oh my God, I'd hate to start over. Michael, the gentleman that you met, he's as brilliant a designer as you would meet anywhere. He's up in my studio now sewing his own clothes that are so beautiful. He won't let anybody else sew them. But so we have that kind of talent. But is it necessary to have? We don't know. I don't know.
Well, I think clothing is such a specialized product and there's so much choice that.
It is. How do you choose your wardrobe? What do you do? If you have a limited amount of money, what do you do? How does one choose that I want a jacket made out of faux, printed in like a tiger? How does one make that decision? I want a tiger jacket. How do I make a decision to wear a cotton shirt on a hot day in a bright color that may? I don't know. I haven't given it enough thought. How is it when you get older and you want to fit into a young man's suit? Doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel, and you try, and then you realize that you shouldn't, because it's not the same.
Well, there's been the style is international now, and
Absolutely.
sportswear
Absolutely.
is international, and but there still there are niches, you know.
Oh, you're right. Absolutely.
People discover, you know, that certain things appeal to people.
But you know, you never know how you discover it. I know there was a moment in time in my life, but everything I did was terrific. I don't know how it happened, but the stores would come in and say, "Oh my God, he's a genius," and I'd say, "What the hell did I do? What did I do that made?" But somehow, it clicked for about 5 years. There was nothing I could do that was wrong. And then all of a sudden, it started to become a little lopsided, and it wasn't quite as good. And I started to complain, and I went out of business and back into business. I used to tell kids, and I'm not so sure I would tell them anymore, don't go into business unless you have an alter ego. Don't go into business unless you have, especially designers, unless you have somebody who really knows how to take the burden of running a business away from you. Because if you're going to get involved, which is what I did, I got too involved with the business aspect rather than just the design aspect. And I wasn't as good a businessman as I was, and I thought I was, and I wasn't. But I was a better businessman than my partners. That was the problem. If I had had a great business person, I could have parlayed, given my personality and given what I could do, into a much, much bigger business. I'm not unhappy about it, but you have to have an alter ego. You have to know where your talent lies and what you do. Almost everybody that I knew that made it had an alter ego. A brother, a lover, a son, somebody, or a muse that moved you beyond. My muse was one of my assistants. I dressed her. In my head, I dressed her. And if I didn't dress her, I don't know if I would have been as successful. So all the parts and pieces, you know, for any art form, and it is an art form. What's going on today? You look at women's wear, the stuff, I don't know what year it's coming from, what planet it's coming from, but every picture is so different, you don't know.
Yeah, well, it's partly this democracy, high-low, and then individual choice, you know, people putting together outfits.
Well, we were at the hamburger joint across the way, looking out the window, excuse me, and everybody, whether it was somebody wheeling a car, everybody had a look. New Yorkers are really quite interesting. I mean, how they put their bodies together. I also make these crazy statements. The only people who are dressing rightly today are Asians. They are the best dressers. They have the best bodies. They look the best. They have the best taste. We just took the, path.
Yes.
In my old age, I'm doing things I haven't done in years. All these Asian people, they're dressed so beautifully. Their bodies are so gorgeous. I don't know. That's just my feeling. You talk about that global
But evidently
thing.
There's such cultural differences. So if you have an international business, you know that Europeans perhaps are more conservative, Americans are more way out.
But even the sizing has come closer. You remember that? I'll tell you a funny story. As you know, I do a lot of uniforms. I've done all kinds of strange uniforms. And I was asked to go on a cruise for Holland American because they wanted a designer to do all their stuff. And it was not much of a cruise. It was in the middle of the winter. It was from Miami to New York, and I was so seasick I couldn't believe it. But I suddenly realized they keep a whole host of people in the front of the ship. They live there, and they make the clothes. They actually sew the clothes. I looked at the size range. This is mostly men. The average waist was 26 inches, 28 inches. In America, the average waist is 38 inches for the man.
Yeah.
It's a big difference,
Yeah.
I said to them, let them sew it. I'm not going to do any designing for you.
But why don't you talk about the uniform business? Because you're discovering this area where you could really make people happy, I think is very inspirational.
Americans hate uniforms. Americans hate wearing uniforms. Europeans love uniforms. When I used to do stuff in Europe, first of all, they wear it, they take care of it. They understand that if they're getting something from the company, they don't have to buy something for themselves because clothes are so expensive there. Americans just trash their uniforms. I have to say that to start with. When I started uniforms, it was in 1972 when I was asked to do a uniform for Avis Rental Car. And I remember saying, wow, a uniform? What the hell is a uniform? But I went out to Garden City and I met the president of Avis, and I found him charming. And when I looked at the clothes they were wearing, I couldn't believe it. And I said, I can do better than that.
Were they cheap looking? Or?
Cheap looking, and what he did was, because red was his color, Avis is his color, he was forcing everybody to wear red, but red head to toe. I mean, it was sort of frightening. And when you told him you didn't have to do it head to toe, he sort of looked at you, well, wow. So that was the first uniform I took on. It was not the greatest uniform because he wanted them to wear a jacket that didn't have any buttons, didn't have any snaps, and didn't have a zipper. But it had to stay straight in front so that each side hit each side. And I kept saying, but when they move, no, I want it straight each side. Of course, it never worked out that way. And it was done in that polyester knit that we were talking about in the 70s. But I became so intrigued with the idea of it. And I was working with a company called Hart Schaffner Marks out of Chicago. And they said to me, you're good at this. First of all, you're not only good at it, but you can charm the hell out of everybody. So you go with us. And I started sweep into all the from there I went to TWA, which was my first big airline. And that was just a love affair. In fact, they're building a new hotel called TWA out on the island, which is the old Saarinen building. And we may be doing some work, we'll see, with that, which is 50 years later. But and then I went from there to United, then from there to Pan Am. I just became the designer of choice. And then in
I just want to mention that one of the things I think all of us know when we started to fly, that the stewardesses represented an ideal of presentation.
Right. And there were no male stewards. We don't call them stewardesses anymore. They're in flight.
But they were chic. And
well, you had to. First of all, they had to do what management said. There were no unions at that point for them. So if I designed a hat, they had to wear it. If management wanted a hat, they had to wear it. Now everything goes through unions.
Oh, that's interesting.
And you have to be very careful because sometimes, and I'm not anti-union, but sometimes they can be impossible to work with. And so if in their contracts they say they don't wear hats.
People are more willful now. They don't want to follow rules as much.
Well, you look at the airlines in Asia, and you look at the airlines in Europe, they still do the old rules. They still do what management wants. American Airlines don't do that. You cannot, believe me, I knocked myself out to make JetBlue look different. It wasn't easy because you end up with, now that all the so-called stewardesses are still there for 20 and 30 years, they all know what they like and they all know what they want to wear. And God forbid you try to put them in something different. I did US Airways just before they went out of business, and I listened too much to them. And I hated what the thing ended up in because I listened too much. I love what I did with JetBlue because I didn't listen as much. And I had management behind me because they wanted to be different than the rest of the people. Yeah. It was also my biggest account for me.
Well, talk about designing uniforms for men. Are they more, less
critical?
Easier.
Easier. The men are so easy. Just fit me and let me out of this place. I have a wonderful story about men. I did this cruise, RCCL. And I went to France to pick up the first big ship, the first mega ship. And I went there to dress everybody. We had the uniforms made in China. We had them shipped to Saint-Nazaire outside of Paris, up on the Brittany coast. we had to do the orchestra. We did everything from the orchestra to the waiters, to the cleaners, and to the regular officers, who were the most impossible to work with, the biggest prima donnas of any one of them. I mean, God knows what they put me through. But the orchestra, the guys in the orchestra came in for their fittings, and they had red jackets. That's what they wanted, were red jackets. And when we try to fit them, they'd say, no, 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 I want the sleeve longer, and they want it longer. And I kept saying, you can't have it that long. It's awful. It looks stupid. I thought maybe something mod had happened when I hadn't looked. And what they really wanted was, because when they raised their arms to play the trumpet, they didn't want to see the sleeve. So that's really what uniforms are about. I dress a lot of the security people, rather the janitors that run around New York. You know, the Bryant Park people, the 34th Street Partnership, they all wear my clothes. And they have, in uniforms, there are specific things that you need. So that's what we do. I did Amtrak. That was the hardest thing I ever did in my life, because everybody's worked for Amtrak for 100 years. They all know what they want. They all know how many pockets they want, how many they don't want. But I'm good at that because at least I listen. Most American designers just want to do the uniform, sketch it, make it, and run away. But it's what people live in and work in. And I started to say, I have been the designer of record for 35 years now for FedEx. Now, 35 years dressing FedEx is a big deal. I feel very proud of it. And they just signed me to another contract, which I think is terrific. Also, I was the one who did all the iconic uniforms for McDonald's. So doesn't that sound, that's big time?
Yes. FedEx, I noticed, you have choice. In other words, you have a number of alternatives. You have some alternatives.
Yes, absolutely.
You don't have to wear the same style every day.
And they're more sportswear than UPS. All looks alike. I can't do UPS because I'm signed by you, but UPS is very specific. And when Miuccia Prada became famous, so did UPS, because all those people look like Miuccia Prada. But my uniform for FedEx is much more casual, more outerwear looking.
Color blocking.
Color blocking, yes. All
shorts.
I put the first people in shorts, 1982. Nobody wore shorts. You know why? It's fascinating, because nobody knew what men were going to wear on their feet. We weren't wearing sneakers then. And so they put the shorts on and had socks and had black shoes on. They sort of looked like male porno stars. It was terrible. It was terrible, so they didn't want them. But I forced FedEx. I'm the first one, 1982. FedEx was the first one, and then the post office dropped it very quickly, right afterwards. Walking shorts. Women never wore pants. In the beginning, they wouldn't let me put pants on them. And of course, even to this day, a lot of women who work in the big difference about uniform is the woman in the workforce. Before it was all men, now it's half women, 3/4 women. That's changed because they're more fashion conscious, they want better clothes, and that changed the uniform business. Women, more than anything else.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I heard a talk about how there were uniforms for factory workers in the 30s and 40s, but construction workers wanted some independence, so they put on T-shirts and rolled up the sleeves. They put on jeans, and once that happened, they no longer wanted to just wear.
I know. It's even hard for me today because I have to work with management, and management sometimes doesn't agree. For instance, JetBlue never wore, when I first did it 15 years ago, they never wore a tie. They always had an open shirt. That was what the whole idea was, to keep them open. But new management came in and said, I want to look a little more legacy. So now they're wearing ties, and some of them hate it, but I have to make them wear them because that's what management wants.
Okay, well, we'll now wind up.
How can we wind up? How can we wind up?
You've spent a lot of time giving back to New York City, to the fashion schools, working for change. I gather that's meant a tremendous amount to you, and that has been fulfilling.
Well, the one thing we didn't talk about, which I'll do briefly, was my role as the president of the CFDA, because that was an extremely important role, and the fact that I really was responsible for the fashion shows in the park that started. I was president of it for 10 years until we sold it to IMG. If probably you know, I won't have a gravestone because I'm going to be cremated. But I probably remembered more for that than almost anything. The fact that I took all these disparate designers and made them feel proud of themselves, and have moved it on now with Diane, who's the president, who has just done a miraculous job with it.
Did you get that idea because your studio is perched above Bryant Park?
Yes, very much so. I mean, we were being laughed at by the world because we didn't have any one place to show. And I think you remember what happened. A piece of plaster fell down on Susie Menkes's head at one of the, and she called them second raters in America. So all the designers got together, and Fern, who worked for me as my executive director, said, let's do something to organize it. We didn't know we were going to be in Bryant Park, so the first times we got little hotel rooms, but suddenly the park was there, and in the beginning, I think I told you that before, in the beginning we couldn't use the main, the grass lawn in the middle because underneath there are the library stacks. And they thought the pressure of the weight would not hold it, so we took both plazas on either side. But after a while, since I'm on the board of the park, I convinced them that we could use the center of aisle, and that we were there for quite a while until it outgrew, and the park didn't want us in it, even though I was on the board of the park, because we were taking time out of the public. It's a public park, even though it's a bid. And people wanted to be there during the fashion times, and we took half the park or 3/4 of the park. So that started the growth all over the place.
But it raised the whole, the cachet of the business tremendously.
Absolutely. If anything, that again, I think that's what I'll be known for as the person who did that. Thank God we had people like Miss Wintour and Condé Nast Group that really put their money where their mouth was. Nobody else did. Not after the first year, anyway. But I think that would be one of the biggest contributions I ever did. Made us global, made the CFDA a worthwhile place. When I joined it, you asked me the question before, there were 5 designers, 6 designers, 8 designers, 12 designers. They all did, Oscar and Mary and Ralph, and all very famous designers, but they were doing nothing except having a little gala every year, and they were being controlled by Eleanor. So when I became president, Eleanor and I sort of were like this in the beginning because she realized that I wasn't going to use her that we didn't have to use her. She never forgave me for that. I don't know if I should say that here, but she actually sued the CFDA. She wanted the money. They wanted the CFDA back to the day she died, and I was friendly with her. And we go out to dinner. It was like awful to go through it, but she wanted the CFDA back. And in my quiet way, although I don't sound very quiet now, but I just stuck my head forward and did what we had to do, and time passed. And suddenly I was president for 16 years. I had never expected to be president for 16 years. Diane is now president for 10 years. And she told me, I don't want to be president for more than 2 years. But it's seductive. You love it. Once you get into it, you love it. She loves it for different reasons than I do, but she loves it.
Well, it's important work. And I think this has been very interesting because you've talked about some things that people don't know that much about.
We have another 7 hours. I could go further.
So I want to thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome very much.